The machine said he was gone, but his mind was wide awake. Julian Cross, 34, heir to the cross-continental empire, owner of 17 luxury properties across 3 continents, had been lying in that bed for 47 days. The doctors called it a vegetative state. His stepmother called it a tragedy. His cousin called it an opportunity. But Elena Vance, the night shift nurse who made $19 an hour and couldn't afford her own car insurance, called it something else. Suspicious. She'd seen coma patients before. She knew what real brain death looked like. And this? The micro movements in his fingers when voices rose. The shift in his breathing when his stepmother entered the room. The way his heart rate spiked exactly 3 seconds after someone mentioned pulling the plug. Julian Cross wasn't dying. He was listening. And if Elena was right, if he could hear everything they were saying, every plan they were making, every lie they were telling, then the person in the most danger in Riverbend General Hospital wasn't the man in the bed. It was her. Before we dive in, I need you to stick with me until the very end. This story gets darker before it gets light, and the payoff is worth it. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this truth can travel. The first time Elena noticed something wrong, she was 3 hours into a double shift and running on gas station coffee that tasted like burnt regret. Room 237 was supposed to be easy. A long-term coma patient, minimal interaction, check vitals, adjust the drip, document, move on. The kind of assignment they gave to nurses who were either brand new or too exhausted to complain. Elena was both. She pushed open the door at 11:47 p.m., the hallway light slicing across the darkened room. Julian Cross lay exactly as he had every night for the past 6 weeks, head tilted slightly left, arms at his sides, chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. The ventilator had been removed 2 weeks ago. He could breathe on his own. That was supposed to be a good sign, but his chart told a different story. Elena set down her supply tray and pulled up the digital records on the wall-mounted tablet. Sedation levels? Elevated. Neurological assessments? Postponed. Physical therapy? Consultations? Canceled. Someone had been checking boxes that said stable without ever actually checking the patient. She glanced at the IV bag. Lorazepam. High dose. Continuous drip. Her brow furrowed. Lorazepam was for agitation, for patients who fought the tubes, who thrashed and confused day for night. Julian Cross hadn't moved anything beyond reflex in over a month. So why was he still being sedated like he was a danger to himself? Elena crossed to the bed and leaned over him, shining her penlight into his eyes. Pupils sluggish but reactive. She touched his wrist, feeling for a pulse. Steady, strong, stronger than it should have been for someone supposedly circling the drain. "Can you hear me?" she whispered. Nothing. She straightened, exhaling. Maybe she was seeing ghosts. Maybe the overnight shifts were finally getting to her. She turned back to the IV stand and froze. His index finger had moved, not a twitch, not a spasm, a deliberate curl inward, then back. Elena's breath caught. She looked at his face, still slack, eyes closed, but that finger, she hadn't imagined it. She pulled out her phone, checked the time, documented it. Then she stood there in the silence, watching him, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't, but she knew what she'd seen. The day shift nurse, a woman named Bryn, with 15 years of experience and exactly 0 patience for questions, didn't even look up when Elena mentioned it the next morning. Reflexes, Bryn said, snapping a latex glove onto her wrist. Happens all the time with long-term patients. Means nothing. It wasn't a reflex. It was... Elena. Bryn finally met her eyes, and there was something cold in the look. "You've been here 4 months. I've been doing this since you were in high school. Trust me, it was a reflex." Elena opened her mouth, then closed it. She needed this job. She'd already been late twice this month because her bus route got cut. She couldn't afford to be the nurse who made waves, so she nodded. "Right, sorry." Bryn's expression softened just slightly. "Look, I get it. You want to help. But Cross isn't going anywhere. His family's got him in a holding pattern until the legal stuff shakes out. Best thing you can do is keep him comfortable and stay out of it." "Stay out of what?" Bryn's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The stuff that's way above our pay grade. Elena wanted to push back, but the words stuck in her throat. She'd been a nurse long enough to recognize a warning when she heard one. The medical field had hierarchies as rigid as any corporation, and she was at the bottom, new, disposable. The kind of person who could be replaced before her locker was even cleaned out. She grabbed her bag and headed for the elevator, but the conversation replayed in her head the entire ride down. Stay out of it. Like Julian Cross was a case to be managed, not a human being lying in a bed unable to speak for himself. The bus ride home took 40 minutes, long enough for Elena to convince herself she'd overreacted. Maybe Bryn was right. Maybe it was just reflex. She'd only been on the neuro floor a few weeks. What did she know about coma patients, really? But when she closed her eyes that night, all she saw was that finger, moving, deliberate. She didn't sleep. Elena didn't see Julian's family until 3 nights later. She was adjusting his pillows, something the protocol said to do every 4 hours, but that most nurses skipped. When the door opened and 2 people walked in like they owned the place. The woman was tall, mid-50s, expensively dressed in a charcoal blazer and heels that clicked like a countdown. Her hair was swept into a bun so tight it could have been a facelift. She didn't look at Elena. The man beside her was younger, early 30s, with the kind of jaw that belonged on a politician and eyes that belonged on a shark. He had his hands in his pockets, and a smile that suggested he was used to getting his way. Still breathing, I see, the woman said, stopping at the foot of the bed. Her voice was flat, clinical. Any change? Elena hesitated. No, ma'am. He's stable. Stable, the woman repeated, like the word tasted bad. That's one way to put it. The man, Elena assumed he was family, maybe a cousin, stepped closer to Julian's bedside. He tilted his head, studying him the way someone might study a broken appliance. How much longer do we wait, Margot? Until the doctors give us something definitive, Margot replied. She finally glanced at Elena, and the look was sharp enough to cut. You're new. 4 months, Elena said. Then let me be clear, my stepson's condition is delicate. We don't need speculation, we don't need optimism, and we certainly don't need some night shift nurse playing hero. Do your job, nothing more. Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she forced herself to nod. Understood. Margot's gaze lingered for another moment, then she turned back to the man. Let's go, Preston. We're done here. They left without another word. Elena stood there, pulse hammering in her ears. The room felt colder. She looked down at Julian, at his motionless face, and wondered what it must be like to hear people talk about you like you were already gone. Then she saw it again. His finger. The same small, deliberate curl. This time, she was sure. But she was also smart enough to know that being sure and being believed were 2 very different things. She started keeping a notebook. Every time she worked a shift in 237, she documented everything, visitor logs, medication changes, conversations she overheard. It wasn't protocol. It probably wasn't even legal. But something in her gut told her that if she didn't start paying attention, Julian Cross was going to disappear, and no one would ask why. On her 5th night in a row, Elena arrived to find the room empty. Not just empty of visitors, empty of Julian. Her heart lurched. She grabbed the tablet, pulled up his chart. Transfer order signed 2 hours ago. Destination: imaging suite, scheduled MRI. Except it was 1 a.m. Imaging didn't run overnight unless it was an emergency. Elena left the room and found Bryn at the nurse's station, scrolling through her phone. Where's Cross? Elena asked. Bryn didn't look up. MRI. At 1 in the morning? Family request. They wanted privacy. Privacy for a brain scan? Bryn finally met her eyes, and there was a warning in them. Drop it, Elena. But she couldn't. The pieces weren't adding up. Privacy for an MRI. Postponed neuroassessments, sedation levels that didn't match the patient's condition, and a family that looked at Julian like he was an obstacle, not a loved one. Elena walked away before Bryn could say anything else. She took the back stairwell down to imaging, moving quickly, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. The hallway was dim, most of the lights on energy-saving mode. She could hear the hum of the MRI machine before she saw it. She found him in the prep area, alone except for a single technician who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Julian was on the table, prepped and draped, but the machine wasn't running. Is there a problem? Elena asked. The tech jumped. Jesus, no. Just waiting for the order to go through. Whose order? Dr. Pembroke's. Elena frowned. Pembroke was the hospital administrator, not a neurologist. Why would he be signing off on this? The tech shifted uncomfortably. Look, I just do what I'm told, okay? She opened her mouth to push further, then her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. You're being watched. Her blood went cold. She looked up, scanning the hallway. No one. Just the hum of the machines and the distant echo of footsteps. The tech was staring at her. You okay? Elena pocketed her phone, forced a smile. Yeah, fine. But she wasn't. She took the stairs back up, legs shaking, mind racing. Someone was paying attention to her. Someone knew she was asking questions, and they wanted her to stop. The smart thing would have been to listen. But Elena had never been good at doing the smart thing. 2 nights later, she was called into the supervisor's office. The woman behind the desk was someone Elena had seen maybe twice. Helen Marks, director of nursing, a woman whose entire demeanor screamed, I have better things to do. Sit, Helen said, not looking up from her computer. Elena sat. Helen clicked her mouse a few times, then finally turned to face her. I'm going to be direct. We've received complaints. Elena's stomach dropped. Complaints about what? About you overstepping, asking questions outside your scope of practice, making the family uncomfortable. I haven't done anything except my job. Your job is to follow the care plan, not to interrogate staff, not to second-guess physician orders, and certainly not to make the Cross family feel like they're under investigation. Elena. Helen's voice was sharp now. You're a good nurse, but you're also replaceable. Riverbend General doesn't tolerate employees who create problems. Do you understand? Elena felt the words land like a fist to the chest. She wanted to argue. She wanted to pull out her notebook, show Helen everything she'd documented. But she knew how this worked. People like her didn't win fights against people like Margot Cross. So she nodded. I understand. Good. You're being reassigned, effective immediately. To where? Pediatrics, night shift. It wasn't a promotion. It was a warning. It was exile. It was the hospital's way of saying, shut up or get out. Elena felt her throat tighten, but she didn't let herself cry. Not here. Not in front of Helen. When do I start? She asked quietly. Tonight. Clear out your things and report to the 4th floor. Elena stood, nodded once, and walked out. The hallway felt longer than it had on the way in. Her hands were shaking. She'd been in that hospital 4 months and already she was being buried. Not fired, that would have been too obvious. Just moved, silenced, made irrelevant. She thought about her student loans, her rent, the medical bills from her dad's stroke last year that she was still paying off in installments. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She couldn't afford to fight. But she also couldn't stop thinking about Julian Cross lying in that bed, while the people who were supposed to protect him planned his death. Elena cleared out her locker that night, hands shaking as she shoved her stethoscope and extra scrubs into her bag. She walked past room 2371 last time. The door was cracked open. Inside, she could see Julian, still and silent under the dim glow of the monitor. Margot was there too, standing beside the bed, phone pressed to her ear. Elena slowed just enough to hear. No, I don't care what the neurologist says. We move forward with the DNR. If he codes, we let him go. It's cleaner that way. Elena's breath stopped. Margot continued, voice low and cold. Preston's already got the legal team drafting the estate transfer. Once Julian's officially declared, everything shifts to us. No complications, no delays. There was a pause. Then, she's gone, the nurse. Marks handled it. We're clear. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She stepped back, out of sight, and kept walking. But her mind was screaming. They weren't waiting for Julian to die. They were planning it. Duh. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what the hell to do. She had no proof, no recording. Just a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear and a gut feeling that would get her laughed out of any courtroom. But she couldn't let it go. Elena pulled out her phone and opened a browser. She typed, Julian Cross, Hotel Empire, family. The first result was a Forbes profile from 2 years ago. Julian at some gala, smiling beside a woman who wasn't Margot. The caption read, Cross-Continental CEO, Julian Cross with late mother, Victoria Cross, weeks before her passing. Elena scrolled further. More articles, more photos. Then she found it, a smaller piece, barely a blip in the business section. Julian Cross hospitalized following single-car accident. Condition unknown. Family spokesperson declines comment. She clicked the date. 48 days ago. The same day he'd arrived at Riverbend General. Elena's hands were shaking now. She searched deeper, found a Reddit thread, mostly speculation, but one comment stood out. Anyone else think it's weird his stepmom took over the company 2 days after the accident? Like she was just waiting for an excuse. Another reply. She's been trying to push him out for years. Guess she finally got her shot. Elena closed the browser and sat in the dark, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. If Julian Cross woke up, he'd take everything back. So they were making sure he never would. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. Same unknown number. Last warning. Walk away. Elena stared at the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. Whoever was sending these messages knew where she was, knew what she was doing, maybe even knew what she was thinking. She should have been terrified, but all she felt was rage. She went back inside, not to her new floor, not to pediatrics, to room 237. The hallway was empty. Third shift had started, and most of the staff were on the other side of the building. Elena moved quickly, slipping through the door and closing it behind her. Julian was alone. She crossed to his bedside, leaned down close. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can, I need you to know I'm not giving up. His chest rose and fell. The monitor beeped. Nothing else. Elena reached for the IV line, her fingers brushing the tubing. She thought about the sedation levels, the postponed assessments, the way everyone kept saying he was stable, when stable just meant convenient. She made a decision. She adjusted the drip. Not enough to set off alarms, just enough to slow it down, to give his system a chance to clear. If you're in there, she whispered, now's the time to prove it. She stayed for 5 more minutes, watching, waiting. Then his eyelids fluttered. Just once. So brief she almost missed it, but it was there. Elena's breath hitched. She stepped back, pulse racing, and pulled out her phone. She opened the voice recorder app, hands trembling, and hit record. Then she set it on the bedside table, hidden behind the water pitcher, and walked out. If they were going to kill him, they were going to have to say it out loud. And this time, someone would be listening. But the next 72 hours were the longest of Elena's life. She worked her shifts on the pediatric floor, changing diapers and administering antibiotics and pretending everything was fine. But every free moment she was checking her phone, waiting for the recording app to pick up something, anything. Most of it was useless. Footsteps, beeping monitors, the shuffle of nurses coming in and out to check vitals. But on the third night, she heard voices. She was in the break room, headphones in, scrubbing through the audio file when she caught it. 2 voices, low, deliberate. Margot and Preston. Elena's heart started to race. She turned up the volume, leaning closer. Think she knows? Who? The nurse? Doesn't matter. She's off the floor. Still, if she starts talking, she won't. Mark's made it very clear. 1 more complaint and she's done. She needs the paycheck too much to risk it. There was a pause. Then Margot's voice, colder than before. How long until the DNR is finalized? End of the week. Legal's dotting the I's. Once it's signed, we're clear. And if he wakes up before then? Preston's laugh was sharp, humorless. He won't. I've made sure of that. Elena's blood turned to ice. How? Margot asked. Dr. Pembroke's been adjusting his meds, keeping him under. Even if he tried to surface, he wouldn't get far. Good. The last thing we need is Julian suddenly coherent, asking questions. He's not going to ask anything. By next week, he'll be gone. Officially, and we'll have the company. There was the sound of footsteps, the door opening, then silence. Elena sat there, headphones still in, hands shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. She had it. She had proof. But proof didn't mean anything if no one would listen. She tried the hospital ethics board first, sent an anonymous email with a transcript of the recording, got an automated reply saying they'd review it within 10 business days. Julian didn't have 10 days. She tried the state medical board, same result. She even tried calling a local news station, but the intern who answered the phone sounded bored and told her they'd look into it. No one cared. Or maybe they did, but not enough. Not fast enough. Elena was running out of options. So she did the one thing she'd been avoiding. She went to see Dr. Pembroke. His office was on the top floor, tucked behind a frosted glass door with his name etched in gold letters. Elena knocked twice, heart hammering, before she heard the voice inside say, "Come in." Dr. Pembroke was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of calm, authoritative presence that made you want to trust him. He looked up from his desk, smiled politely, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Vance, what can I do for you?" Elena sat, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to talk to you about Julian Cross." The smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you are." Pembroke leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I've heard you've had some concerns about his care. His care is being sabotaged, and I think you know that." There was a long pause. Then Pembroke sighed, the way a teacher might sigh at a student who just didn't get it. "Elena, may I call you Elena?" She didn't answer. "You're a dedicated nurse, I can see that, but sometimes dedication can cloud judgment. Julian Cross is in a persistent vegetative state. His prognosis is poor. His family is making very difficult decisions, and frankly, it's not your place to interfere." "They're killing him." Pembroke's expression didn't change. "That's a very serious accusation." "I have proof." "Do you?" He leaned forward now and the warmth was gone. "Because, from where I'm sitting, you have a recording you made without consent, in violation of hospital policy and state law. If you take that to anyone, you'll be fired, possibly prosecuted, and Julian Cross will still be exactly where he is." Elena felt the room tilt. Pembroke stood, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was supposed to be comforting. It felt like a threat. "Go back to pediatrics," he said quietly. "Do your job. Forget about this." "And if I don't?" He smiled. "Then you'll find out just how small your world can get." Elena left his office feeling like she'd been punched in the chest. She had the proof. She had the truth. And none of it mattered, because the people in power had already decided how this story ended. She walked through the hospital in a daze, barely registering the faces around her. She thought about quitting, about walking out and never coming back, about letting Julian Cross disappear into whatever fate Margot and Preston had planned for him. It would have been easier. But then she thought about his finger, that tiny, deliberate movement. He was still in there, and if she gave up, he'd die alone. That night, Elena did something reckless. She waited until her shift ended, then walked back to room 237. The hallway was quiet. The night charge nurse was in the break room. No one saw her slip inside. Julian was exactly where she'd left him. Still, silent, sedated. She crossed to the bed and leaned down close, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what else to do. I tried. I really tried. But no one's listening, and I don't know how to fight people like them." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She turned to leave, and then she felt it, a hand on her wrist. Not tight, not strong, but deliberate. Elena froze. She looked down. Julian's fingers were wrapped around her wrist. His eyes were still closed, but his grip was real. Her breath caught. "Julian?" His eyelids fluttered, opened, just a sliver. And for the first time in 49 days, Julian Cross looked at another human being. His lips moved. No sound. But Elena could read the shape of the word. Help. Lamt. She almost screamed. Instead, she clamped a hand over her mouth and stumbled back, heart racing, mind spinning. He was awake. He was awake. But if she told anyone, if the wrong person found out, they'd sedate him again. Or worse. Elena grabbed her phone, hands shaking, and pulled up the Notepad app. She typed quickly, then held the screen in front of his face. "Can you hear me?" Julian's eyes focused on the words. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. "Do you know what's happening?" Another nod. Elena's pulse was hammering so hard she thought she might pass out. She typed again. They're trying to kill you. Do you understand? His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not fear, rage. He nodded. Elena's mind raced. If he was awake, if he could understand, then maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. She typed one more message. I'm going to get you out of here, but you have to trust me. Julian's grip on her wrist tightened, just for a second. Then he let go. Elena pocketed her phone and looked at him one last time. Don't give up, she whispered. Not yet. She walked out of the room, adrenaline flooding her system. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have backup. She didn't even know if she'd make it through the next 24 hours without getting fired, or worse. But she had something she didn't have before. She had Julian Cross on her side. And that changed everything, Elena made it to the parking garage before her legs gave out. She braced herself against the concrete pillar, gasping for air, trying to process what had just happened. Julian Cross was awake. Not fully, not yet, but aware. Listening. Waiting. And now she was the only person in the world who knew. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She almost didn't look, but something made her swipe the screen. You went back to his room. That was a mistake. Elena's blood froze. She spun around, scanning the empty garage. Nothing. Just shadows and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She typed back with shaking fingers. Who is this? No response. She stood there for another 30 seconds, heart hammering, before forcing herself to move. She got in her car, locked the doors, and sat in the driver's seat with her hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles went white. Someone was watching. Someone always had been. But now they knew she wasn't backing down. Elena started the engine and pulled out of the garage, checking her rearview mirror every few seconds. No one followed. At least, not that she could see. By the time she got home, it was past 3 in the morning. Her apartment was a studio in a building that smelled like mildew and regret, the kind of place where the landlord only fixed things after you threatened to call the city. She dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. She should have slept. She had another shift in 14 hours, but her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Julian was awake. That meant the sedation wasn't as strong as Pembroke thought, or maybe Julian's system was burning through it faster than they'd anticipated. Either way, it was a window, a narrow one. If she could keep him conscious long enough to get him out of that room, maybe, just maybe, they had a shot. But how? She couldn't just wheel him out the front door. The hospital had security, cameras, protocols. And even if she managed to get him past all of that, where would she take him? Another hospital? They'd call Riverbend. They'd call Margot. And Elena would be arrested before she even got him through triage. She pulled out her phone and opened a browser, typing in patient rights, medical kidnapping, legal protections. The results were a mess of legalese and worst-case scenarios. Without power of attorney, without proof of abuse that a court would actually recognize, she had no legal standing. Julian was technically under Margot's guardianship. Even if Elena got him out, Margot could have the police drag him back within hours. Elena closed the browser and stared at the ceiling. There had to be another way. She thought about the recording, about Margot's voice, cold and calculating, planning Julian's death like it was a business transaction. If she could get that in front of the right person, someone who couldn't be bought or silenced, maybe it would be enough. But who? The hospital wouldn't listen. The ethics board was a joke. The police would defer to Margot's lawyers. Then it hit her. Julian had built an empire. That meant he had allies, people who owed him, people who'd want to know what was happening. Elena grabbed her laptop and pulled up Cross Continental's website. The executive page loaded slowly, her internet stuttering like it always did. She scanned the names and faces. Most of them were strangers. But one caught her eye. Marcus Hale, Chief Operating Officer. The bio said he'd worked with Julian for over a decade. If anyone knew what kind of man Julian was, if anyone would care that he was being erased, it would be him. Elena found his email buried in a press release from 6 months ago. She opened a new message and started typing. Subject: Julian Cross is alive, and someone's trying to make sure he doesn't stay that way. She attached the audio file, wrote 3 paragraphs explaining everything she knew, and hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she sat back and waited. The reply came 6 hours later. Elena woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the coffee table. She jolted upright, disoriented, her neck stiff from sleeping at a weird angle. The screen showed an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Is this Elena Vance?" The voice was male, clipped, professional. "Who's asking?" "Marcus Hale. You sent me an email." Elena's heart kicked into overdrive. She sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. "You got it." "I did, and I listened to the recording." There was a pause. "Is it real?" "Every word." "Then we need to meet, today." Elena glanced at the clock. She had 4 hours before her shift. "Where?" "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital. Brew Point. I'll be there in an hour." "How will I know it?" "I'll know you." He hung up. Elena stared at the phone, pulse racing. This was either the smartest thing she'd ever done or the dumbest. She got dressed, grabbed her bag, and headed out. Brewpoint was one of those aggressively hipster places with reclaimed wood tables and a chalkboard menu that took 10 minutes to decipher. Elena ordered a black coffee she didn't want and sat in the corner watching the door. Marcus Hale walked in exactly on time. He was older than his photo suggested, maybe late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of tailored suit that cost more than Elena's rent. He scanned the room, spotted her, and walked over without hesitation. "Miss Vance?" She stood. "Mr. Hale?" He gestured for her to sit, then took the chair across from her. His expression was unreadable. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both." A flicker of something, maybe respect, crossed his face. "Tell me everything." So she did. She walked him through the past 2 weeks, from the first time she'd noticed Julian's finger move to the conversation she'd overheard between Margot and Preston. She told him about the sedation levels, the postponed assessments, the DNR order. She told him about Pembroke. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "I knew something was off," he said quietly. "Margot took control of the company 2 days after the accident, said it was temporary until Julian recovered. But she's been making permanent decisions, restructuring, selling off assets. It didn't sit right." "She's not planning for him to recover," Elena said. "No, she's not." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then looked up. "I need to see him." "You can't just walk into his room. Margot's got people watching." "Then you get me in." Elena blinked. "How?" "You're still on staff, aren't you?" "Barely." "Then that's enough." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I need 5 minutes alone with Julian. If he's awake, if he can communicate, I can get a lawyer involved. Real legal power, not hospital bureaucracy. And if they catch us, then we both lose." His eyes were hard now. "But if we do nothing, Julian's dead by the end of the week. So what's it going to be?" Elena's throat tightened. She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea, all the ways it could go wrong. Then she thought about Julian's hand on her wrist. The word he'd mouthed. Help. "Okay," she said. "Tonight, after midnight. That's when the floor's quietest." Marcus nodded. "I'll be there." The rest of the day dragged. Elena went through her shift on autopilot, checking vitals and changing IV bags and trying not to think about what she was about to do. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped. Every time someone looked at her too long, she wondered if they knew. By the time midnight rolled around, her nerves were shot. She texted Marcus, "Loading dock, back entrance, 15 minutes. His reply was immediate, "On my way." Elena clocked out early, telling the charge nurse she wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a lie. Her stomach was in knots. She made her way to the loading dock, a dingy area behind the hospital where supply trucks came and went during the day. At night, it was deserted. She waited in the shadows, watching the door, until she saw a figure approach. Marcus stepped into the light, dressed in jeans and a dark jacket. He looked different without the suit. Older, tired. "This way," Elena said, gesturing toward the service entrance. She used her badge to unlock the door, and they slipped inside. The hallways were dimly lit, the overnight cleaning crew working on the other side of the building. They took the service elevator up to the 3rd floor, avoiding the main nurses' station. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They reached room 237. She glanced down the hallway. Clear. 5 minutes? She whispered. That's all you get. Marcus nodded and stepped inside. Elena stood guard by the door, every muscle in her body tensed. She counted the seconds. 60. 120. 180. At 4 minutes, she heard footsteps. Her stomach dropped. She turned and saw Bryn rounding the corner, clipboard in hand. Bryn stopped when she saw Elena. What are you doing here? You're not on this floor anymore. I left something in the break room. Bryn's eyes narrowed. At midnight? I was in the area. Right. Bryn took a step closer, and Elena's pulse spiked. You're a terrible liar, you know that? Before Elena could respond, the door to room 237 opened. Marcus stepped out, his face pale. Bryn's expression shifted from suspicion to alarm. Who the hell are you? Marcus Hale, Julian Cross's COO, and I'm about to make a very big problem for this hospital. Bryn opened her mouth, but Marcus cut her off. I've just confirmed that Mr. Cross is conscious and aware, which means every decision made on his behalf without his consent is invalid, including the DNR order. Bryn's face went white. That's not... It is, and I've got a lawyer on speed dial who's going to have a field day with this. He turned to Elena. We need to move. Now. Elena didn't hesitate. She followed Marcus down the hallway, Bryn's voice echoing behind them. I'm calling security! They made it to the stairwell before the alarm started. The hospital erupted into chaos. Security flooded the third floor, radios crackling, voices shouting. Elena and Marcus split up. He went out the front entrance, blending into a group of visitors leaving the ER. Elena took the service exit, her badge getting her through the locked doors. She made it to her car, hands shaking so hard she could barely get the key in the ignition. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Lawyers filing an emergency injunction first thing in the morning. They can't touch Julian until a judge reviews the case. Elena exhaled, relief flooding through her. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was something. She started to type a response, but another message came through. Unknown number. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Elena stared at the screen, her relief evaporating. Then her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but the caller ID said Riverbend General, Administration. She picked up. Hello? Miss Vance, like... It was Helen Marks. Her voice was ice. You're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will be waiting if you attempt to enter the premises. Your final check will be mailed. The line went dead. Elena sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed to her ear. She'd just lost her job, her income, her health insurance, and she'd only bought Julian one day. Maybe two, if the lawyer was fast. But Margot and Preston had money. They had power. They had a system that bent in their favor. And now they had a reason to come after her directly. Elena dropped the phone into the cup holder and leaned her head back against the seat. She'd crossed a line. There was no going back. All she could do now was hope it had been worth it. The next morning, Elena woke to 17 missed calls. Most of them were from numbers she didn't recognize. 2 were from Marcus. 1 was from a reporter at the Riverbend Tribune. She ignored all of them and went straight to the news. The headline hit her like a freight train. Cross-continental heir in legal battle over medical decisions. Family claims interference. The article was vague, carefully worded, but the implications were clear. Margot's legal team had issued a statement calling Marcus's injunction a baseless attempt to undermine the family's authority. They painted Julian as a tragic victim of a car accident and Marcus as an opportunist trying to seize control of the company. There was no mention of Elena, no mention of the recording, but buried at the bottom of the article was a single line that made her blood run cold. Hospital staff member under investigation for unauthorized access and potential patient endangerment. They were coming for her. Not publicly, not yet, but they were building a case. Elena closed the article and sat in silence. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Judge granted a temporary hold on the DNR. Julian's protected for the next 72 hours. But Margot's appealing. We need more. Elena typed back. More what? Proof that Julian's aware, medical testimony, something the court can't ignore. Elena's stomach twisted. She'd gotten Julian a few days. But unless they could prove he was conscious, unless they could get him in front of a doctor who wasn't on Pembroke's payroll, Margot would win. And Julian would die. Her phone buzzed again. Different number. Meet me. Tonight. 8 p.m. Corner of 5th and Langley. Come alone. Elena stared at the message. No name, no context. She should have deleted it, should have blocked the number. But something told her this was the break they needed, so she typed back, I'll be there. 5th and Langley was a sketchy part of town, the kind of place where streetlights flickered and businesses closed before dark. Elena parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, her hand wrapped around the pepper spray in her pocket. She reached the corner at 7:58. The street was empty except for a black sedan idling by the curb. The back door opened. Elena hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run. But then a voice called out from inside. Get in, Miss Vance! We don't have much time. She recognized the voice. It was the same one that had sent the warning texts. Elena climbed into the back seat. The man sitting across from her was in his 40s, clean cut, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He had the look of someone who'd spent too many years in uncomfortable positions. Who are you? Elena asked. Someone who's been watching Julian Cross's situation very closely, and someone who wants to help. Why? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because Margot Cross is dangerous, and if she gets away with this, I'm next. Elena frowned. Next for what? She's been cleaning house. Anyone who's loyal to Julian, anyone who might ask questions, she's been removing them, quietly. I'm an accountant for Cross Continental. I've seen the numbers. Money's disappearing. Assets are being moved offshore. She's not just trying to kill Julian. She's trying to gut the company and walk away with everything. Elena's pulse quickened. Do you have proof? The man reached into his briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. Financial records, shell companies, wire transfers, everything she's been hiding. He handed it to her. Elena stared at the small piece of plastic in her palm. Why give this to me? Because you're the only one who's had the guts to fight her. And because if Julian wakes up, he's going to need this. What's your name? The man shook his head. Better you don't know. Just get that to Marcus Hale. He'll know what to do with it. Elena pocketed the flash drive. What happens to you? I disappear, at least for a while. He reached for the door handle. Watch your back, Miss Vance. Margot doesn't leave loose ends. The door opened and he stepped out into the night. Elena sat there for a moment, processing, then got out and headed back to her car. She'd just been handed a nuclear bomb. Now she had to figure out how to detonate it, without getting killed in the blast. She met Marcus the next morning at a law office in downtown Riverbend. He was already there when she arrived, sitting in a conference room with a woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Laura Finch, the attorney handling Julian's case. Elena handed Marcus the flash drive. Where did you get this? He asked. Someone who wants Margot stopped. Laura plugged the drive into her laptop. Her expression shifted as she scrolled through the files. This is extensive. Offshore accounts. Falsified board approvals. She's been siphoning millions. Marcus leaned forward. Can we use it? In a criminal case? Absolutely. But for the guardianship hearing, we need medical proof that Julian's conscious. Financial fraud won't be enough to override Margot's authority. Elena's heart sank. So we're back to square one. Not quite, Laura said. If we can get Julian in front of an independent neurologist, someone outside Riverbend's influence, and they confirm he's aware, the judge will have to reconsider. How do we do that? Elena asked. Margot's got the hospital locked down. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then we get him out. Laura's eyes widened. You're talking about removing him from the facility without authorization. That's the only option we have left, Marcus finished. If we wait for the system to work, Julian's dead. You said it yourself, we have 72 hours. After that, Margot's lawyers will tear the injunction apart. Elena felt her stomach twist. You want to move him, physically? Yes. That's insane. The hospital has security, cameras, and even if we get him out, where do we take him? I have a colleague, Laura said slowly. Dr. Raymond Weiss, neurologist. He He runs a private practice an hour outside the city. If we can get Julian there, he'll evaluate him. No questions asked. Marcus looked at Elena. Can you get access to his room? I'm banned from the hospital. But you still have your badge, don't you? Elena hesitated. She'd been meaning to mail it back, but she hadn't gotten around to it. Yeah. Then we move tonight. The plan was simple. Too simple. Elena would use her badge to get into the hospital through the service entrance. Marcus would create a distraction in the main lobby, something loud enough to pull security away from the third floor. Laura would have a medical transport van waiting at the loading dock. They'd have 10 minutes, maybe less. Elena spent the rest of the day trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. At 11:45 p.m., she parked 3 blocks from the hospital and walked the rest of the way. She wore scrubs she'd borrowed from a friend, her hair pulled back, her face deliberately blank. Marcus was already inside, lingering near the information desk. He gave her the slightest nod. Elena headed for the service entrance, swiped her badge, and slipped inside. The hallways were quiet. She took the stairs to the third floor, her heart hammering with every step. She reached room 237 and paused outside the door, listening. No voices, no movement. She pushed it open. Julian was alone, eyes closed, the monitors beeping steadily. For a second, Elena thought maybe he'd slipped back under. But then his eyes opened. He looked at her, really looked. We're getting you out, she whispered. His lips moved, forming a single word. Now? Now. She disconnected the monitors, silencing the alarms before they could trigger. She unlocked the wheels on the bed and started pushing. The hallway was still clear. She moved quickly, heading for the service elevator. That's when the lights went out. Up. The backup generators kicked in a second later, bathing the hallway in red emergency lighting. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm started blaring. Marcus had done his part. Elena kept moving, pushing the bed into the elevator. The doors closed just as she heard footsteps pounding down the hallway. The ride down felt like it took forever. When the doors opened, she was in the basement. The loading dock was 50 feet away. She pushed the bed through the narrow corridor, her arms screaming with effort. Julian's weight made the bed hard to maneuver, and she nearly clipped a corner before steadying it. The loading dock door was ahead. She could see the van idling outside, Laura behind the wheel. Elena pushed harder, her lungs burning. She was 10 feet from the door when it burst open. Preston stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. His smile was cold. Going somewhere? Elena's blood turned to ice. She stopped, hands still gripping the bed rail, her mind racing for an escape that didn't exist. Preston stepped closer, hands in his pockets, completely calm. You've caused a lot of trouble, Miss Vance, but it's over now. One of the guards moved forward, reaching for the bed. That's when Julian's hand shot out and grabbed the guard's wrist. The man yelped, stumbling back. Preston's smile vanished. Julian's eyes were open, fully open. And for the first time in 51 days, he spoke. His voice was rough, barely more than a rasp, but the word was clear. No. No. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Preston's face went from smug to shocked in the span of a heartbeat. The security guard Julian had grabbed stumbled backward, clutching his wrist like he'd been burned. The second guard froze, eyes wide, suddenly uncertain about what he was supposed to do. Julian's hand dropped back to the bed rail, trembling with the effort. His eyes stayed locked on Preston. You're awake, Preston said, and for the first time Elena heard something crack in his voice. Fear. Julian didn't respond. He was breathing hard, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Speaking that single word had cost him. But the message was clear. He wasn't gone. He wasn't helpless, and he wasn't going to let them take him. Elena's mind snapped back into gear. She grabbed the bed rail and shoved, hard, driving the bed forward. Preston jumped out of the way, and the guards scrambled to the sides as Elena pushed Julian through the loading dock door. Laura had the van's back doors already open. Elena and Laura worked together, yanking the bed up the ramp. Elena pulling from the front, Laura guiding from behind. The wheels caught on the edge, and for one horrible second, Elena thought they were stuck. Then the bed lurched forward, and they were inside. Go! Elena shouted. Laura slammed the doors shut and sprinted for the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. Behind them, Preston was yelling into his phone. The guards were running back inside, probably going for their radios. The van peeled out of the loading dock, tires screeching. Elena braced herself against the side wall, gasping for breath. Julian was still on the bed, his eyes half closed now, but his chest was rising and falling, alive, awake. She'd done it. They'd actually done it. Then she heard the sirens. Laura took a hard left, and Elena nearly lost her balance. She grabbed onto the bed frame, steadying herself as the van swerved through the streets. "They're calling the cops," Laura said from the front seat, her voice tight. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before every patrol car in the city is looking for us." "Where's Weiss?" Elena asked. 40 minutes north, off Route 17. But we're not going to make it if they set up roadblocks." Elena's stomach twisted. She looked down at Julian. His eyes were open again, watching her. "How are you feeling?" she asked, even though it was a stupid question. "Like hell," Julian rasped. His voice was stronger now, but still rough. "Where are we going?" "To a doctor who's not trying to kill you." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good plan." Laura's phone rang. She answered on speaker. "Yeah," Marcus's voice crackled through. "Police scanner's going crazy. They're calling it a kidnapping." "It's not kidnapping if the victim's conscious and consenting," Laura shot back. "Try explaining that to a judge after they've arrested all of us. Where are you?" "Heading north on 5th. We'll hit Route 17 in 10 minutes if we don't get pulled over first." "I'm working on a distraction. Just keep moving." The line went dead. Elena looked out the back window. In the distance, she could see flashing red and blue lights. At least 2 patrol cars, maybe more. "They're getting closer," she said. Laura cursed under her breath and took another sharp turn, cutting through a residential neighborhood. The van's suspension groaned in protest. Julian shifted on the bed, trying to sit up. Elena put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't, you'll hurt yourself." "I've been lying down for almost 2 months," Julian said. "I'm done being still." He managed to prop himself up on one elbow, wincing with the effort. His muscles were weak, atrophied from weeks of immobility, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "Who's driving?" he asked. "Laura Finch. She's your lawyer." "And you are?" Elena blinked. "You don't know?" "I know your voice. I don't know your name." "Elena Vance. I was your night nurse." Julian studied her for a long moment. "You're the one who kept talking to me." "Yeah." "You believed I was still in there." "I did." He held her gaze. "Thank you." Elena didn't know what to say to that. She settled for a nod. The van took another sharp turn, and Julian winced, gripping the bed rail. He was clearly in pain, but he wasn't complaining. Elena grabbed a pillow from the foot of the bed and shoved it behind his back for support. "Why did they do it?" Julian asked quietly. Elena didn't have to ask what he meant. "Your stepmother and cousin want the company. They figured if you were gone, they'd take everything." "How long was I out?" 51 days. But you weren't out. They were keeping you sedated." Julian's jaw tightened. "I know. I heard them talking. I just couldn't—" He broke off, frustration flickering across his face. "I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was like being buried alive." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She'd suspected as much, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that turned her stomach. "We're going to stop them," she said. "We've got proof, financial records, recordings, everything." "Good." Julian's voice was cold now. "Because when this is over, I'm going to make sure they never see daylight again." They made it to Route 17 without getting pulled over, but the sirens were still in the distance, growing closer. Laura pushed the van as fast as it would go, weaving through sparse traffic. Elena's phone buzzed. Marcus. Distraction worked. "Police are responding to a fire alarm at Cross-Continental headquarters. You've got maybe 20 minutes before they realize it's fake." Elena showed the message to Laura. 20 minutes, Laura muttered. "That gets us maybe halfway." "Then we need a backup plan," Elena said. "We don't have a backup plan." Julian spoke up from the bed. "Yes, we do. Pull over." Laura glanced in the rearview mirror. "What?" "Pull over. Now." Laura hesitated, then eased the van onto the shoulder of the highway. She killed the engine and turned around. "What are you doing?" Julian was already trying to swing his legs off the bed. Elena grabbed his arm. "You can't walk. You've been immobile for almost 2 months." I can stand, Julian said through gritted teeth. And I can make a phone call. To who? Someone who owes me a favor. Elena exchanged a glance with Laura, then helped Julian sit up fully. His legs were shaking, his muscles weak, but he planted his feet on the floor of the van and stayed upright. Phone, he said. Elena handed him hers. Julian dialed from memory, his fingers slow but deliberate. The line rang twice before someone picked up. It's Julian Cross, he said, his voice rough but commanding. I need a car, clean plates, no questions. Route 17, mile marker 42. A pause. No, I'm not dead. Yes, I'm serious. 30 minutes. He hung up and handed the phone back to Elena. Who was that? Laura asked. An old friend. He'll be here. And if he's not? Julian leaned back against the bed, exhausted from the effort of sitting up. Then we improvise. The car arrived in 28 minutes. It was a black SUV with tinted windows, driven by a man in his 60s who didn't ask a single question. He pulled up alongside the van, nodded at Julian through the window, and popped the back hatch. Laura and Elena helped Julian out of the van and into the SUV. It was a struggle. Julian's legs kept buckling, and he had to lean heavily on both of them, but they managed. The driver stayed in his seat the entire time, eyes forward, like this was just another Tuesday. Once Julian was inside, Elena climbed in beside him. Laura got in the passenger seat. Where to? The driver asked. Laura gave him the address of Weiss's clinic. The driver nodded and pulled back onto the highway. Elena looked back at the van, now abandoned on the shoulder. What about that? Marcus will handle it, Laura said. Right now, we just need to get Julian to Weiss. They drove in silence for a while. Julian had his eyes closed, conserving energy. Elena watched him, still half convinced this was all going to fall apart, that the police would pull them over, that Margot's people would find them, that Julian would slip back into unconsciousness and they'd lose him all over again. But he stayed awake. And slowly, the city lights faded behind them, replaced by stretches of farmland and empty highway. They reached Weiss's clinic just after 2 a.m. The building was small, unassuming, tucked away at the end of a gravel road. It looked more like a house than a medical facility. Laura had called ahead, and Weiss was waiting at the door when they pulled up. He was in his 70s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a cardigan over scrubs. He took one look at Julian and waved them inside. Get him on the exam table, Weiss said, leading them to a room in the back. Elena and the driver helped Julian out of the SUV. He was barely conscious now, his body finally giving out after the adrenaline wore off. They got him onto the table, and Weiss immediately went to work, checking his vitals, shining a light in his eyes, running his hands over Julian's limbs to test reflexes. How long was he sedated? Weiss asked. 7 weeks, Elena said. High-dose lorazepam. Continuous drip. Weiss frowned. That should have put him in a deep vegetative state. How was he even awake? I started reducing the dose about a week ago, just a little at a time. Weiss glanced at her, something like respect flickering in his eyes. You might have saved his life. Maybe, but we need you to prove he's conscious for a court. Weiss nodded. I'll run a full neurological assessment, EEG, cognitive response test, the works. But it's going to take time. How much time? 6 hours? Maybe more. Laura stepped forward. We don't have 6 hours. Margot's lawyers are probably already filing motions to have him declared incompetent. Then they'll have to wait, Weiss said firmly. I'm not rushing this. If I'm going to testify that Julian Cross is neurologically sound, I need to be absolutely certain. Otherwise, it won't hold up in court. Laura opened her mouth to argue, but Julian spoke first. Do it right, he said, his voice barely audible. I don't want any room for doubt. Weiss nodded. Smart man. They waited. Elena sat in the clinic's small waiting area, exhausted but too wired to sleep. Laura was on her phone, coordinating with Marcus, trying to figure out how to keep Margot's legal team at bay for the next few hours. The driver, whose name Elena still didn't know, sat in the corner, arms crossed, eyes closed. He looked like he could sleep through an earthquake. Elena's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Miss Vance? The voice was female, smooth, cold. Elena recognized it immediately. Margot. How did you get this number? Elena asked. I have resources you can't even imagine, and right now I'm using them to find you. Elena's pulse spiked. Good luck with that. You think you've won, Margot continued, ignoring her. You think getting Julian out of the hospital changes anything, but it doesn't. You're a nurse with no money, no connections, and no legal standing. I will bury you. Try it. Margot laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking. You don't understand who you're dealing with. I've spent the last 20 years building an empire. I've crushed people far more powerful than you. You're nothing. Then why are you calling? There was a pause. Because I'm giving you one chance to walk away, Margot said. Leave Julian to me. Disappear. I'll make sure you're compensated. Enough to start over somewhere far from here. Elena's jaw tightened. You want to buy me off? I want to give you a way out. Because if you don't take it, I will destroy you. Your career, your reputation, everything. You'll be lucky if you're not in prison by the end of the month. I'll take my chances. Then you're a fool. Margot's voice turned sharp. You have no idea what you've started. And when it all comes crashing down, don't say I didn't warn you. The line went dead. Elena sat there, staring at the phone, her hands shaking. Laura looked over. Who was that? Margot. She knows we're out here somewhere. She's bluffing. She doesn't know where we are. Maybe. But she's got resources. And she's not going to stop. Laura's expression darkened. Neither are we. Weiss came out 6 hours later looking tired but satisfied. He's awake, Weiss said. Fully responsive. Cognitive function is intact. Motor skills are weak, but that's expected after prolonged immobility. Give him a few weeks of physical therapy and he'll be fine. Elena felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly knocked her over. You're sure? I've got the scans to prove it. EEG shows normal brain activity. He can follow commands, answer questions, engage in complex reasoning. There's no doubt, Julian Cross is not in a vegetative state. He never was. Laura was already pulling out her phone. I need those scans, now. Weiss handed her a USB drive. Everything's on there, enough to blow Margot's case out of the water. Laura took the drive and looked at Elena. We need to get this to the judge, today. What about Julian? Elena asked. He needs rest, but he's stable. We can leave him here with Weiss. Julian appeared in the doorway behind Weiss, leaning heavily on a cane. He looked like hell, pale, gaunt, barely able to stand, but his eyes were clear. I'm going with you, he said. You need to rest, Weiss said. I'll rest when this is over. Julian's voice was firm. Margot's been controlling my life for 2 months. I'm not letting her do it for one more second. Elena stepped forward. Julian, you can barely walk. Then I'll sit. But I'm going to be there when that judge hears the truth. I want to see her face when she realizes she lost. Laura looked at Weiss. Can he travel? Weiss sighed. Medically? No, but I'm not going to stop him. Julian straightened as much as he could, gripping the cane. Let's go. They made it back to Riverbend by noon. Laura had arranged for an emergency hearing at the county courthouse. The judge, a woman named Barbara Hewitt, had a reputation for being no-nonsense and impossible to intimidate. If anyone was going to see through Margot's manipulations, it was her. The courtroom was packed. Margot and Preston were already seated at the defendant's table, flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. Margot looked calm, composed, like she'd already won. Then Julian walked in. The room went silent. Margot's face drained of color. Preston stood up, mouth open, like he was seeing a ghost. Julian didn't look at them. He walked slowly to the plaintiff's table, leaning heavily on the cane, and sat down beside Laura. Judge Hewitt looked up from her notes, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Cross, I was under the impression you were incapacitated. So was I, Julian said. Turns out I was just being drugged. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Hewitt banged her gavel. Order. Margot's lead attorney stood. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Cross has been under medical care for... He's sitting right here, Hewitt interrupted. So unless you're suggesting he's a hallucination, I think we can all agree he's not incapacitated. The attorney opened his mouth, then closed it. Hewitt turned to Laura. Counselor, you requested this hearing. Make your case. Laura stood. Your Honor, we have medical evidence proving that Julian Cross is fully conscious and mentally competent. We also have evidence that his stepmother, Margot Cross, conspired to keep him sedated and has been embezzling from Cross Continental during his incapacitation. She handed the USB drive to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Hewitt plugged it into her computer and spent the next 10 minutes reviewing the scans and financial records. Her expression grew darker with every page. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Cross, do you have a response to these allegations? Margot stood, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. She ignored him. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. My stepson suffered a traumatic accident. We were acting in his best interest by sedating him against his will? Hewitt asked. He was in a coma. He's sitting right there. Does he look comatose to you? Margot's composure cracked. This is absurd. Julian is clearly being manipulated. Enough! Hewitt's voice was sharp. I've seen the scans, I've seen the financial records, and I've seen more than enough to issue a ruling. She turned to Julian. Mr. Cross, do you consent to the medical decisions that were made on your behalf? Julian leaned forward. No, Your Honor, I do not. Do you believe your stepmother acted in your best interest? No, I believe she tried to kill me. The courtroom erupted. Hewitt banged her gavel again. Order! Order in this court! The room quieted. Hewitt looked at Margot, and her expression was ice. Mrs. Cross, I'm revoking your guardianship effective immediately. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Bailiff, please escort Mrs. Cross and Mr. Preston Cross into custody. Margot's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, you can't… I just did. Bailiff! Two officers moved forward. Preston backed away, hands up. This is insane. You can't arrest us for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder. Hewitt's voice was calm. Take your pick. The officers grabbed Preston first. He struggled, shouting, but they cuffed him and dragged him toward the door. Margot stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling. For the first time, Elena saw fear in her eyes. You can't prove any of this, Margot said quietly. Hewitt smiled. I don't have to. The DA will. The officers cuffed Margot and led her out. The courtroom doors swung shut, and just like that, it was over. Elena sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, her head in her hands, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. Against all odds, against all the money and power Margot had thrown at them, they'd actually won. Julian sat down beside her, moving slowly, still gripping the cane. You okay? He asked. Elena looked up. I don't know. Are you? Julian was quiet for a moment. I heard everything, he said. Every conversation, every lie, every time they talked about letting me die. And I couldn't do anything, couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped inside my own body. His voice cracked. Elena didn't know what to say, so she just sat there, letting him talk. You were the only one who didn't give up on me, Julian continued. Everyone else, they looked at me like I was already gone. But you kept talking to me like I mattered. You did matter. Julian met her eyes. I owe you my life. Elena shook her head. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Before she could respond, Laura appeared in the doorway. We've got a problem. Elena's stomach dropped. What now? Margot made bail. She's out. Julian stood, his face hardening. How? Her lawyers posted $2 million an hour ago. She's under house arrest, but she's free until trial. Elena felt her blood run cold. Margot was out, which meant she was still dangerous. She's going to come after us, Elena said. Laura nodded. Probably, which is why we need to move fast. I've got the DA filing formal charges tomorrow. Once that's done, Margot won't be able to touch you. And until then? Julian asked. Until then, you both stay somewhere safe. Julian looked at Elena. You got a place to go? Elena thought about her tiny apartment, the broken lock on the door, the neighborhood where gunshots weren't uncommon. Not really. Then you're staying with me. Julian. I'm not asking, but Julian's house was an hour outside the city, a sprawling estate surrounded by trees and security gates. Elena had never seen anything like it. The driveway alone was longer than her entire street. They pulled up to the front entrance and Julian led her inside. The interior was minimalist, expensive, the kind of place that belonged in a magazine. Elena felt completely out of place. "Guest room's upstairs," Julian said. "Second door on the left. Make yourself comfortable." Elena hesitated. "Are you sure about this? You saved my life. The least I can do is give you a place to sleep." She wanted to argue, but she was too exhausted. She climbed the stairs, found the room, and collapsed onto the bed without even taking off her shoes. She was asleep in seconds. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. Elena bolted upright, heart pounding. It was dark outside. She grabbed her phone. 3:47 a.m. Another crash, this time closer. She got out of bed and crept to the door, opening it slowly. The hallway was dark, but she could see light flickering downstairs. "Julian?" she called out. No response. Elena moved toward the stairs, her pulse racing. She could smell smoke now. Someone had set the house on fire. Someone had set the house on fire. Elena ran down the stairs, choking on smoke that was thicker than it should have been this early in a blaze. She found Julian in the living room, hunched over his cane, trying to make it to the front door. Flames were crawling up the curtains, spreading fast across the expensive furniture. "We need to get out!" Elena shouted, grabbing his arm. Julian coughed, nodding. They stumbled toward the entrance together, but the doorway was already engulfed. Heat slammed into them like a wall. "Back door," Julian rasped, pointing toward the kitchen. They turned and moved as fast as Julian's weakened legs would allow. Elena could hear glass shattering somewhere upstairs. The fire was spreading faster than any natural blaze. This wasn't an accident. Someone had doused the place in accelerant. They made it to the kitchen. Elena yanked open the back door and they spilled out onto the patio, gulping fresh air. Behind them, the house groaned, flames licking out of the windows. Julian collapsed onto the grass, coughing violently. Elena pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "Fire department, what's your emergency?" "House fire. 1847 Ridgeline Drive. Someone's trying to kill us." The dispatcher's voice shifted. "Are you safe right now?" "For the moment." "Stay on the line. Units are on the way." Elena looked back at the house. The entire first floor was engulfed now, flames climbing toward the second story where she'd been sleeping minutes ago. If she'd woken up even 30 seconds later, she'd be dead. Julian was still on the ground, staring at the inferno. "She did this," he said quietly. "Margot?" "Who else?" His voice was raw with smoke and fury. "She's under house arrest, but she's got people. Always has." Elena's stomach twisted. Margot had been arrested, charged, humiliated in open court, and her response was arson. Not subtle, not careful, desperate, which made her more dangerous than ever. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Within minutes, fire trucks were screaming up the driveway, followed by police cars. Firefighters jumped out and started attacking the blaze, but Elena could already tell it was too late. The house was gone. A police officer approached them, a young guy with a notebook. "You're Julian Cross?" "Yeah." "Anyone else inside?" "No, just us." The officer scribbled notes. "You said someone tried to kill you." "Someone threw accelerant through the windows and lit it up," Elena said. "This wasn't an accident. We'll investigate. In the meantime, you need somewhere safe to go?" Julian looked at Elena. She looked back. They had nowhere. Marcus showed up an hour later, pulling up in a sleek sedan just as the fire trucks were packing up. The house was a smoldering ruin, the roof collapsed, walls blackened and crumbling. Everything Julian owned was gone. Marcus stepped out of the car, took one look at the wreckage, and swore under his breath. "You two okay?" "Alive," Julian said. "Barely," Elena added. Marcus opened the back door of his car. "Get in, both of you." They didn't argue. Elena climbed into the back seat, Julian sliding in beside her. Marcus got behind the wheel and pulled away from the estate without another word. "Where are we going?" Elena asked. "Somewhere Margot can't find you." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. "Laura's already filing a motion to revoke Margot's bail. After this, no judge in their right mind will let her stay free." "How long will that take?" Julian asked. 24 hours. Maybe less. "And until then?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He turned onto a back road heading deeper into the countryside. Until then, you stay off the grid. They drove for another 30 minutes before Marcus pulled up to a small cabin tucked away in the woods. It was rustic, isolated, the kind of place you'd never find unless you knew exactly where to look. "This is mine," Marcus said. "No one knows about it except me. You'll be safe here." Elena climbed out, looking around. The cabin was surrounded by trees, no neighbors in sight. It felt like the edge of the world. "There's food inside, basic supplies. Stay inside, keep the lights off at night, and don't answer the door for anyone but me or Laura." Julian leaned on his cane, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Thank you," Marcus nodded. "Get some rest. I'll be back tomorrow with updates." He got back in the car and drove off, leaving them standing in the clearing. Elena looked at Julian. "You okay?" "No." He turned and limped toward the cabin. "But I will be." Inside, the cabin was small but functional. One bedroom, a couch that doubled as a bed, a kitchenette with a wood-burning stove. Elena found blankets in a closet and made up the couch while Julian collapsed into a chair by the window. "You should sleep," Elena said. "Can't." Julian was staring out into the darkness. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that hospital bed, stuck, helpless." Elena sat down across from him. "You're not helpless anymore." "Aren't I?" He gestured at his cane. "I can barely walk. I can't fight. I can't even run if someone comes through that door." "But you can think. And you're still alive. That's more than Margot wanted." Julian was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I heard her. In the hospital. She stood next to my bed and talked about me like I was already dead. Like I was just a problem to be solved. She's the problem now." "Is she?" Julian's voice was bitter. "She's out on bail. She just tried to burn us alive. And we're hiding in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, hoping she doesn't find us. Doesn't feel like we're winning." Elena didn't have an answer for that, because he was right. Morning came too fast. Elena woke on the couch to the sound of Julian moving around the kitchen. He'd made coffee, weak, instant, but coffee nonetheless. She sat up, her back aching from the lumpy cushions. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "A little." Julian handed her a mug. Marcus texted. The judge denied Margot's bail revocation. Elena's stomach dropped. "What?" Her lawyers argued the fire was unrelated. No direct evidence tying her to it. Judge said there wasn't enough to justify keeping her locked up before trial. "That's insane. That's money." Julian sat down heavily. "Margot's been buying people for years. Judges, prosecutors. She knows how the system works." "So what do we do?" Julian stared into his coffee. "We make sure the trial puts her away for good. That's the only move we've got left." Elena's phone buzzed. She pulled it out and saw a text from Laura. "DA's office wants to meet, today. They need your testimony." Elena showed the message to Julian. "Good," he said. "Let's bury her." The DA's office was in downtown Riverbend, a gray concrete building that smelled like stale coffee and legal briefs. Laura met them in the lobby and escorted them upstairs to a conference room where two prosecutors were waiting. The lead prosecutor was a woman in her 40s named Rachel Ortiz, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. Her assistant, a younger man named David Park, sat beside her with a laptop open. "Mr. Cross, Miss Vance, thank you for coming." Rachel gestured to the chairs across from them. "We've reviewed the evidence your attorney provided. It's compelling, but we need to hear it from you directly." Julian leaned forward. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with the accident." Julian took a breath. "I was driving home from a board meeting. It was late. Roads were empty. I remember headlights behind me. Too close. Too aggressive. Then I was being forced off the road. I tried to correct, but I overcorrected. Hit a tree." "You think someone ran you off the road?" David asked. "I know they did. I saw the car. Black sedan. No plates." Rachel made a note. "And after the accident?" "I woke up in the hospital. Or I thought I woke up. I could hear people talking, but I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. They said I was in a coma, but I wasn't. I was aware of everything." "And you believe you were being sedated intentionally?" "I know I was. I heard Margot and Preston talking about it, about keeping me under until they could finalize the DNR. Rachel looked at Elena. And you witnessed this? I recorded it, Elena said. She pulled out her phone and played the audio file. Margot's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. We keep him sedated, then we finish it. Rachel's expression hardened. That's conspiracy to commit murder. Along with fraud, embezzlement, and about a dozen other charges, Laura added, sliding a folder across the table. Financial records show Margot siphoned over $40 million from Cross Continental while Julian was incapacitated. David scrolled through the documents on his laptop, his eyes widening. This is extensive. It's airtight, Laura said. You've got motive, means, and opportunity. All you need is to put it in front of a jury. Rachel leaned back in her chair. We'll need both of you to testify. Julian, you'll be the key witness. Your testimony about being conscious while sedated is the linchpin. I'll testify, Julian said without hesitation. And Miss Vance, your recordings and your actions as his nurse will corroborate everything. Rachel's gaze was steady. But I need to warn you, Margot's defense team is going to come after you, hard. They'll paint you as an opportunist, someone who manipulated a vulnerable patient. Let them try, Elena said. Rachel smiled faintly. Good. Trial starts in 3 weeks. We'll be in touch. They left the DA's office feeling something Elena hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not much, but enough. Marcus was waiting outside, leaning against his car. How'd it go? They're moving forward, Laura said. Full prosecution, murder conspiracy, fraud, the works. Good, Marcus straightened. Because you're going to want to see this. He pulled out his phone and opened a news app. The headline hit Elena like a punch. Cross Continental Board votes to remove Margot Cross as CEO. Elena's eyes widened. They ousted her? Unanimously, Marcus said. I called an emergency board meeting this morning, presented the evidence. They didn't even hesitate. Margot's out. Effective immediately. Julian stared at the screen. Who's running the company now? You are, if you want it. Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Not yet, but soon. Marcus nodded. Take your time. The company's not going anywhere. The next 3 weeks were a blur. Elena and Julian stayed at the cabin, laying low while the media circus erupted around them. Margot's arrest became national news. The financial fraud, the attempted murder, the recording of her cold, calculated plan to let Julian die. Public opinion turned vicious. Protests formed outside Margot's mansion. Death threats flooded her lawyers' offices. She went from untouchable socialite to the most hated woman in the country practically overnight. Preston tried to flip. He offered to testify against Margot in exchange for a reduced sentence. The DA's office turned him down. They had enough evidence to bury both of them. And through it all, Julian recovered. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. He worked with a physical therapist Marcus had hired, rebuilding the strength he'd lost during those 2 months of forced immobility. At first, he could barely stand for more than a few minutes. By the end of the 2nd week, he was walking without the cane. By the 3rd, he was jogging. Elena watched him push himself day after day, refusing to quit even when his muscles screamed in protest. She'd never seen anyone that determined. You're going to hurt yourself, she said one afternoon, watching him do another set of squats. I've been hurt worse, Julian replied, not stopping. That's not the point. He finished the set and straightened, sweat dripping down his face. The point is that I'm not going to walk into that courtroom looking weak. Margot took 2 months of my life. I'm not giving her one more second. Elena couldn't argue with that. The trial began on a cold Monday in October. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters, cameras flashing as Julian and Elena made their way inside. Laura walked beside them, briefcase in hand, every inch the warrior heading into battle. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Spectators filled every seat, craning to get a look at Julian Cross, the man who'd come back from the dead to face down his would-be killers. Margot sat at the defense table, flanked by her legal team. She was dressed in a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back, her expression calm, but Elena could see the tension in her shoulders, the cracks in her composure. Preston sat beside her, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. Judge Hewitt entered, and the room stood. She took her seat and banged the gavel. "Let's begin." Rachel Ortiz stood. "Your Honor, the state calls Julian Cross to the stand." Julian rose and walked to the witness box. He raised his right hand and was sworn in. Rachel approached. "Mr. Cross, can you tell the court what happened on the night of your accident?" Julian spoke clearly, calmly, recounting the night he was run off the road. The hospital, the sedation, the helplessness of being trapped inside his own body while Margot and Preston planned his death. The courtroom was dead silent. Rachel played the recording Elena had made. Margot's voice echoed through the room. "We keep him sedated, then we finish it." Gasps rippled through the gallery. A few spectators whispered. Hewitt banged the gavel. Rachel continued. "Mr. Cross, in your own words, what did you hear your stepmother say while you were in the hospital?" Julian's gaze locked onto Margot. "She said I was a problem, that I needed to be handled, that once I was gone, everything would be easier." Margot's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, hearsay." "It's a dying declaration exception," Rachel countered. "Mr. Cross believed he was going to die. His testimony is admissible." Hewitt considered. "Overruled. Continue." The trial went on for 3 days. Elena testified about the sedation levels, the postponed assessments, the warning texts. Dr. Weiss testified about Julian's neurological evaluations, confirming he'd been conscious the entire time. The accountant who'd given Elena the flash drive testified remotely, his face blurred, his voice distorted. He walked the jury through the financial records, showing how Margot had systematically drained Cross-Continental's accounts. Margot's defense team tried to poke holes. They argued the recording was inadmissible. They claimed Julian's memories were unreliable. They painted Elena as a rogue nurse with a vendetta. But the evidence was overwhelming. On the 4th day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They came back with a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The courtroom erupted. Margot sat frozen, her face pale. Preston dropped his head into his hands. Hewitt banged the gavel. "Order, order." She turned to Margot. "Mrs. Cross, you have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Sentencing will be in 2 weeks. Until then, you are remanded into custody without bail." The bailiff approached. Margot stood slowly, her hands shaking as they cuffed her. For the first time, Elena saw fear in her eyes. As they led Margot out of the courtroom, she turned and looked at Julian. Her mouth moved, forming words Elena couldn't hear. But Julian could. His expression didn't change. He just watched her go. Sob. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Cross, how does it feel to see justice served? What's next for Cross-Continental? Do you have anything to say to the people who doubted you?" Julian stopped at the top of the steps, Elena beside him. He looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at the world that had written him off. "I'm not going to stand here and say, 'I'm grateful for what happened,'" he said. "I'm not. 2 months of my life were stolen. I was drugged, silenced, and nearly killed by people who were supposed to care about me." His voice was steady, but there was steel in it. "But I'm still here, and I'm here because one person refused to look the other way." He turned to Elena. "She didn't know me. She had nothing to gain, but she fought for me anyway. That's the kind of person the world needs more of." Elena felt her throat tighten. Julian looked back at the cameras. "Margot Cross thought she could erase me. She was wrong. And anyone else who thinks they can do the same, think again." He turned and walked away, Elena following. Mom. 2 weeks later, Margot and Preston were sentenced. Margot got 30 years. No parole. Preston got 20. Their appeals were denied within months. Cross-Continental's board formally reinstated Julian as CEO. His first action was to establish a foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable patients, funding independent medical advocates, legal aid, and oversight programs. He named it the Vance Initiative. Elena protested. Julian overruled her. "You saved my life," he said. "Let me honor that." She didn't have the heart to argue. 6 months after the trial, Elena stood in the lobby of a newly opened clinic funded by the Vance Initiative. It was bright, modern, staffed by nurses and doctors who actually gave a damn. Julian walked up beside her, hands in his pockets. "What do you think?" I think it's incredible, Elena said. You're running it, by the way. She turned to him, startled. What? Director of Operations. The board approved it this morning. Julian, I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person I know. You saw a problem and you fixed it. That's what this place needs. Elena stared at him. You're serious? Completely. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Julian smiled. Good, because we've got work to do. That night, Elena sat on the steps outside the clinic, watching the sun set over Riverbend. The city looked different now, quieter, lighter. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You should have taken the money. Elena's blood ran cold. She looked up, scanning the parking lot. Empty. Another text. You think this is over? It's not. I'm still out there. Elena's hand started shaking. She dialed Julian. He picked up on the first ring. What's wrong? Someone just texted me. They said, what did they say? Elena read the messages aloud. There was a long pause. Then Julian said, Get inside. Lock the doors. I'm on my way. Elena stood, her pulse racing. She looked around the empty lot one more time. Then she saw it. A black sedan. No plates. Idling at the far end of the parking lot. The same car from Julian's accident. The driver's window rolled down. A figure in the shadows raised a phone. Elena's screen lit up with a final message. You were never supposed to survive this. The sedan's engine roared, and it started driving straight toward her. Elena didn't think. She ran. The sedan's engine roared louder, tires screeching as it accelerated across the parking lot. Elena sprinted toward the clinic entrance, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. 20 feet, 15, 10. The car was closing fast. She reached the door and yanked it open, diving inside just as the sedan slammed into the concrete barrier where she'd been standing seconds before. The impact was deafening, metal crunching, glass shattering, the barrier cracking but holding. Elena scrambled to her feet and locked the door, her hands shaking so violently she could barely work the deadbolt. Through the glass she could see the sedan backing up, smoke pouring from its crumpled hood. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-40s, wearing a dark jacket, face obscured by shadows. He reached into the car and pulled out something that made Elena's blood freeze. A gun. She turned and ran deeper into the clinic, pulling out her phone. Her fingers were slipping on the screen, but she managed to dial Julian. Elena? His voice was tight. Where are you? Inside. He's got a gun. Julian, he's coming. The front glass shattered. A gunshot echoed through the building. Elena dropped to the floor behind the reception desk, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Footsteps crunched over broken glass. Slow, deliberate. You should have stayed out of it, a voice called out. Male, calm. Like this was just another Tuesday. Margot paid me good money to tie up loose ends. You and Cross were supposed to die in that fire. Elena's mind raced. She needed a weapon. Anything. She looked around. Medical supplies, clipboards, a computer monitor. Nothing useful. The footsteps were getting closer. I'm not going to make this painful, the man continued. Quick, clean, professional. Elena spotted a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall 10 feet away. She'd have to move, expose herself. But if she stayed here, she was dead anyway. She took a breath and lunged. The gunshot came a split second later, punching through the drywall inches from her head. Elena grabbed the extinguisher, yanked it free, and hurled it toward the reception area. It crashed into a filing cabinet with a loud clang. The man's footsteps stopped. Elena used the distraction to bolt down the hallway, heading for the back exit. She could hear him behind her now, moving faster. Another gunshot. The bullet slammed into the wall beside her. Elena threw herself through the emergency exit door, tumbling out into the alley behind the clinic. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her lungs burning. Sirens wailed in the distance. Julian must have called the police. But they weren't close enough. The man burst through the exit behind her, raising the gun. Elena grabbed a metal trash can lid and spun around just as he fired. The bullet ricocheted off the lid with a spark, the impact nearly knocking it from her hands. The man's eyes widened in surprise. Then headlights flooded the alley. A car screeched to a stop between Elena and the shooter. The driver's door flew open, and Julian stepped out, moving faster than Elena had seen him move since the hospital. "Get down!" he shouted. Elena dropped. Julian swung something, a tire iron, and connected with the shooter's wrist. The gun flew from his hand, clattering across the pavement. The man staggered back, clutching his arm. Julian didn't stop. He drove forward, slamming the tire iron into the man's knee. The shooter went down hard, screaming. Police cars poured into the alley, lights flashing, officers spilling out with weapons drawn. "On the ground! Hands where we can see them!" The shooter didn't move. Julian stood over him, breathing hard, the tire iron still in his hand. One of the officers approached cautiously. "Mr. Cross, sir, we've got him. You can put that down." Julian looked at the tire iron like he'd forgotten he was holding it. He dropped it and stepped back. The officers moved in, cuffing the shooter and hauling him to his feet. He was bleeding from his mouth, his leg bent at an ugly angle. Elena pushed herself up, her whole body shaking. Julian turned and crossed to her in 3 quick strides. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands on her shoulders, eyes scanning her for injuries. "I'm okay. I'm okay." He pulled her into a hug, and Elena felt something inside her break. The adrenaline, the fear, the weeks of running, it all came crashing down at once. She buried her face in his shoulder and let herself shake. "You're safe," Julian said quietly. "I've got you." The shooter's name was Eric Drummond. Former military, dishonorable discharge, long history of working as a freelance enforcer for people who could afford him. He'd been hired by Margot 6 months before Julian's accident. The plan had been simple: run Julian off the road, make it look like an accident, then disappear. When Julian survived, Drummond was supposed to finish the job in the hospital, but Elena's interference had complicated things. The fire at Julian's estate? Drummond. The threatening texts? Drummond. And now the attempted murder outside the clinic? Also Drummond. Margot had paid him $200,000 up front, with another $300,000 promised once Julian was confirmed dead. The interrogation room at Riverbend PD was small, windowless, designed to make people uncomfortable. Drummond sat across from Detective Sarah Reeves, his lawyer beside him, a public defender who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Let's talk about Margot Cross," Reeves said, sliding a folder across the table. Drummond leaned back in his chair, wincing from his injured leg. "I want a deal. You're not in a position to negotiate. I've got recordings, phone calls, bank transfers, everything." He smiled, and it was ugly. Margot's not as careful as she thinks. Reeves exchanged a glance with the prosecutor sitting in the corner. Rachel Ortiz stood and stepped forward. "What kind of recordings?" Rachel asked. "Her telling me exactly what to do, how to run Cross off the road, how to get into the hospital, how to make sure the nurse didn't cause problems." Drummond's smile widened. "She's been calling me from prison, burner phone. Thought she was clever." Rachel's expression hardened. "You're saying you have proof Margot Cross ordered a hit from inside a federal holding facility?" "I'm saying I have proof of a lot of things, and I'm willing to share, for the right price." The lawyer put a hand on Drummond's arm. "My client is prepared to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence." Rachel considered. "Attempted murder of 2 people, arson, conspiracy. You're looking at life without parole. Or I'm looking at 30 years with the possibility of release if I give you everything on Margot Cross." Drummond leaned forward. "Your call." Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You give us the recordings, all of them. You testify. And you plead guilty to every charge. In exchange, we'll recommend 30 years. No guarantees." Drummond glanced at his lawyer. She nodded. "Deal," he said. The recordings were damning. Margot's voice, cold and precise, giving instructions. How to access Julian's estate, which windows to break, how much accelerant to use, and later, after her arrest, how to find Elena, how to finish what he'd started. The DA's office moved fast. Within 48 hours, additional charges were filed against Margot. Conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts. Obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and now solicitation of murder from federal custody. Her lawyers tried to fight it, claimed the recordings were inadmissible, obtained under coercion, unreliable. But the phone records backed everything up. Calls from inside the prison, transfers from offshore accounts Margot had hidden. It was airtight. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing. "What?" Elena sat in the courtroom gallery, Julian beside her. It had been 3 days since Drummond's arrest, and she still jumped at every loud noise. Still couldn't sleep without seeing that gun pointed at her. But she was here, because she needed to see this through. Margot was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, face pale. She looked smaller than Elena remembered, diminished. Judge Hewitt took the bench. Mrs. Cross, you've been charged with multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder, among other offenses. How do you plead? Margot's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. These charges are based on the testimony of a convicted felon. A convicted felon who has provided extensive evidence corroborating his claims, Rachel interrupted, standing. Phone records, bank statements, recordings, all of which point to Mrs. Cross orchestrating multiple attempts on Julian Cross and Elena Vance's lives. Hewitt looked at Margot. Mrs. Cross, do you have anything to say? Margot stood slowly. For the first time, Elena saw something crack in her composure. I did what I had to do to protect my family's legacy. The courtroom went silent. Excuse me? Hewitt said. Julian was weak. He would have destroyed everything my husband built, everything I've spent 20 years maintaining. Margot's voice was sharp now, bitter. I wasn't going to let that happen. Her lawyer grabbed her arm. Margot, stop talking. No. Margot shook him off. I'm tired of pretending, tired of playing the victim. I did it, all of it, and I'd do it again. The gallery erupted. Hewitt banged her gavel. Order! But Margot wasn't done. She turned to Julian, her eyes blazing. You were always your mother's favorite, always the golden child, but you were never strong enough to run this company. I was. And when you came back from that accident, still breathing, still a threat, I had to act. Julian's expression was unreadable. You should have died in that hospital, Margot continued, her voice venomous. You and that nurse, both of you should have been erased, but you got lucky. Hewitt slammed the gavel again. Mrs. Cross, I strongly advise you to stop talking. Why? It's over anyway. Margot laughed, and the sound was brittle. You've already decided, so let's stop pretending this is about justice. This is about power, and I lost. Hewitt's expression was stone. Bailiff, remove Mrs. Cross from my courtroom. 2 officers moved forward, grabbing Margot by the arms. She didn't resist, just smiled. Enjoy your victory, Julian, she called out as they led her away. It won't last. The doors closed behind her. The courtroom was silent. Then Hewitt spoke. In light of Mrs. Cross's confession, I'm entering a guilty plea on all charges. Sentencing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. She banged the gavel one last time. It was over. Bont. Elena walked out of the courthouse feeling numb. Julian was beside her, quiet, his face unreadable. You okay? She asked. I don't know. He stopped on the steps, looking out at the city. I thought I'd feel something, relief, satisfaction, but I just feel empty. Elena understood. Winning didn't erase what had happened, didn't give back the 2 months Julian had lost, didn't undo the trauma. It'll take time, she said. Yeah. Julian exhaled slowly. But at least it's done. Marcus appeared jogging up the steps. Did I miss it? Margot confessed, Julian said. In open court. Marcus's eyes widened. She what? Told the whole room she did it, that she'd do it again. Jesus. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. Well, that makes things easier, I guess. Yeah. They stood there for a moment, the 3 of them, watching the reporters swarm below. What now? Marcus asked. Julian looked at Elena. Now we get back to work. Tug. 2 weeks later, Margot Cross was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Preston received an additional 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. Drummond got his 30-year deal, and Julian Cross officially stepped down as CEO of Cross Continental, naming Marcus Hale as his successor. The business world was shocked. The media ran endless speculation pieces. But Julian didn't care. He had other priorities now. 6 months after the sentencing, Elena stood in front of the newly opened Vance Initiative headquarters in downtown Riverbend. The building was sleek, modern, 5 stories of glass and steel dedicated entirely to patient advocacy. A banner hung across the entrance, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Julian stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "What do you think?" "I think it's too much. It's not enough." Elena looked at him. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." Julian's voice was firm. "Margot almost killed me because no one was paying attention. Because the system failed. This—" He gestured at the building. "This makes sure it doesn't happen again." Inside, the building was even more impressive. Legal offices on the first floor, medical consultation rooms on the second, training facilities on the third, administrative offices on the fourth. And on the fifth floor, a command center where advocates could monitor cases across the state in real time. It was everything Elena had dreamed of, and more. "We've got 60 staff members starting next week," Julian said, walking her through the main floor. "Lawyers, nurses, social workers, all dedicated to protecting vulnerable patients." Elena stopped in front of a conference room. Through the glass, she could see a long table, chairs, a screen for presentations. "What's this?" "Your office." She turned to him. "Julian, you're the director. You need an office. I don't need something this big. You're running an organization that's going to change the entire healthcare system. You need space to work." He smiled. "And besides, I already had your name put on the door." Elena looked closer. Sure enough, there was a placard. Elena Vance, Executive Director. Her throat tightened. "You're impossible." "I know." The Vance Initiative launched officially 3 weeks later. The response was overwhelming. Within the first month, they received over 200 calls from patients, families, and healthcare workers reporting suspected abuse or neglect. The legal team opened 43 cases. The medical team conducted 37 independent evaluations, and they won. Not every case, but enough. Enough to make a difference. One case in particular stuck with Elena. An elderly man named Robert Kimball, whose daughter had been slowly poisoning him to access his estate. The hospital had missed it. The family doctor had missed it. But a nurse at the facility where he was staying had noticed the patterns and called the hotline. The Vance Initiative sent an advocate. They ran tests, found the poison, got law enforcement involved. Robert survived. His daughter went to prison. When Elena visited him in the hospital afterward, he grabbed her hand and said, "You saved my life." "We just did our job," Elena replied. "No." Robert's grip was surprisingly strong. "You saw me. That's more than anyone else did." Elena thought about that conversation for days afterward. Because that was the point, wasn't it? Not just saving lives, but seeing people, refusing to let them be invisible. A year after the trial, Elena stood on a stage in front of 500 people at the Vance Initiative's first annual conference. Medical professionals from across the country had gathered to learn about patient advocacy, to share their own stories, to figure out how to replicate what the initiative had built. Elena had never been comfortable with public speaking, but this was important. She stepped up to the microphone. "A year ago, I was just a nurse working the night shift, trying to pay my bills and keep my head down. I didn't think I had power. I didn't think I mattered." The room was silent. But then I met a patient who changed everything. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The system had written him off. And I had a choice. I could look away or I could fight. She paused. I chose to fight. Not because I was brave, not because I had all the answers, but because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Her voice grew stronger. Every single person in this room has that same choice. Every day. With every patient. You can follow the protocol, check the boxes, and move on. Or you can stop, look, listen, and refuse to let someone disappear. She looked out at the crowd. That's what this organization is about. Not just policies or procedures. It's about seeing people, about believing that every life, no matter how vulnerable, no matter how powerless, has value. Applause started. Slowly at first, then building. Elena stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding. Julian was waiting in the wings. He smiled at her. You killed it. I almost threw up. But you didn't. She laughed. No, I didn't. He gets. 2 years after the trial, the Vance Initiative had expanded to 12 states. Legislation based on their model had been introduced in Congress. Major hospitals were adopting their training programs. Medical schools were teaching their protocols. It was bigger than Elena, bigger than Julian, and it was working. Elena sat in her office one evening, reviewing case files. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Thank you for saving my father. We didn't know who else to call. You gave us hope." Elena stared at the message, her eyes burning. This was why she did it. This was why it mattered. Not the awards or the recognition or the media attention. These messages, these lives. Julian knocked on her door. "Still here?" "Just finishing up." He walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her desk and sat down across from her. "You know, you're allowed to go home sometimes." "I know." "Do you?" Elena smiled. "I'll leave soon. That's what you said 3 hours ago." "And I meant it 3 hours ago." Julian laughed. "You're impossible. I learned from the best." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Julian said, "I've been thinking." "About?" "About what's next. For the initiative. We're already in 12 states. What more do you want?" "I want to go national, full coverage, every state, every hospital." He leaned forward. "I want to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." Elena looked at him. "That's ambitious. You taught me to think big." "I did no such thing." "You did, when you refused to give up on me." His expression grew serious. "You showed me that one person can make a difference. So now I'm asking, will you help me make this difference bigger?" Elena didn't even have to think about it. Yes. 3 years after the trial, Elena testified before Congress. She stood in a packed hearing room surrounded by cameras and reporters and politicians who held the power to change everything. "Members of the committee," she began, her voice steady. 3 years ago, I was a night shift nurse who witnessed a patient being systematically abused by the people who were supposed to protect him. I reported it, I documented it, and I was punished for it." She paused, letting that sink in. "But I didn't stop. Because that patient, Julian Cross, deserved better. And so do the thousands of vulnerable patients across this country who are being silenced, ignored, and erased by a system that prioritizes profit over people." She laid out the statistics. The cases they'd handled, the lives they'd saved, the policies they'd implemented. "This isn't about one organization," she said. "This is about changing the culture of healthcare, about making sure that every patient has an advocate, every voice is heard, every life is protected." She looked directly at the committee chair. "I'm asking you to pass the Patient Advocacy Protection Act, not because it's easy, but because it's right." The hearing room erupted in applause. The bill passed 6 months later. 5 years after the trial, Elena stood in the parking lot where Drummond had tried to kill her. The clinic had been rebuilt, expanded. It was now a full medical center, complete with trauma services, legal aid, and a dedicated patient advocacy wing. A memorial had been placed near the entrance, a simple stone with a single inscription, "For those who refuse to be silenced." Julian came up beside her. "You okay?" "Yeah," Elena smiled, "just remembering. It's been a long 5 years." "The best 5 years." Julian looked at her. "You know, I never thanked you properly. You've thanked me 1,000 times. Not for saving my life, for giving me a purpose." Elena felt her throat tighten. "You gave me one too." They stood there together, watching the sun set over the city they'd changed. "What do you think happens next?" Julian asked. "I don't know, but I think we keep fighting." "Always?" "Always." 10 years after the trial, the Vance Initiative was in all 50 states. Over 50,000 patients had been protected. Hundreds of cases of abuse had been stopped. Dozens of laws had been changed. Elena stood on a stage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The president shook her hand. "Miss Vance, your work has transformed healthcare in this country. You've saved countless lives, and you've inspired millions." Elena looked out at the audience. Julian was in the front row, smiling. Marcus beside him, Laura, Dr. Weiss. People who'd believed in her when no one else did. "Thank you," Elena said into the microphone. "But this isn't my medal. It belongs to every nurse who's ever spoken up, every advocate who's ever fought back, every person who's ever refused to let someone disappear." Applause filled the hall. Later at the reception, a young woman approached Elena. She looked nervous, clutching a worn notebook. "Miss Vance? I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to say I'm a nursing student. And I read about what you did, about how you saved Mr. Cross. And it made me want to be like you." Elena's eyes stung. "You don't want to be like me. You want to be like you. But braver." The young woman smiled. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know that it was worth it? Fighting for someone when everyone said you were wrong?" Elena thought about that day in the hospital, Julian's finger moving, that tiny, desperate signal that he was still there. "I didn't know," she said honestly. "I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try." The young woman nodded, writing that down in her notebook. And Elena realized this was the real legacy. Not the awards, not the legislation, not even the lives saved. It was this, inspiring the next generation to fight, to speak up, to refuse to look away. 15 years after the trial, Elena stood in her office at the Vance Initiative headquarters. She was older now, grayer, tired in a way that came from decades of carrying other people's burdens. But she was still here, still fighting. The door opened. Julian walked in, moving a little slower than he used to, but still sharp, still present. "You're retiring," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena smiled. "How'd you know?" "Because I know you, and I know that look." She gestured to the files on her desk. "There's still so much to do. There always will be, but you've done enough." "Have I?" Julian crossed to her, took her hands. "Elena, you changed the world. You're allowed to rest." She looked down at their hands. 15 years. They'd built something that would outlast them both. "What will you do?" Julian asked. "I don't know. Sleep maybe, for about a year." He laughed. "And after that? I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out." Elena met his eyes. "You're retiring too? Someone has to make sure you don't start another revolution in your spare time." She smiled. "Fair point. Well, on her last day, the entire staff gathered in the main hall. Over 300 people, nurses, lawyers, advocates, administrators, people who'd dedicated their careers to the work Elena had started. Marcus stood at the front. 15 years ago, a night shift nurse decided that one patient's life mattered. That decision changed everything. It changed healthcare, it changed policy, and it changed all of us. He looked at Elena. Elena Vance taught us that power doesn't come from money or status. It comes from refusing to be silent, from showing up, from fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. The room erupted in applause. Elena stood, her throat tight, and looked out at the faces. So many lives, so many stories. "Thank you," she said simply, "for carrying this forward, for believing that every life has value, for refusing to let anyone disappear." She paused. "I was just a nurse who couldn't walk away. But you, all of you, you're the ones who turned that into something that will last forever." The applause grew louder. Elena stepped down from the podium, and one by one, people came up to thank her, to hug her, to tell her their stories, and she listened to every single one, because that's what she did. She saw people. Chumped. 20 years after the trial, Elena sat on a porch overlooking a lake. She was 70 now, retired, quiet, but not forgotten. The Vance Initiative was still going strong, run by a new generation of advocates who'd grown up inspired by her story. Julian sat beside her reading a book. They'd bought this place together 5 years ago, a refuge, a place to rest. "You ever miss it?" he asked. "The work?" "Yeah." Elena thought about it. "Sometimes, but I think I did what I was supposed to do." "You did more than that." She smiled. "Maybe." They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the water. And Elena realized something. She'd spent most of her life feeling invisible, but she'd never been invisible. She'd just been waiting for the moment that mattered, the moment when she chose to fight. And in that choice, she'd she'd found everything she'd been looking for: purpose, meaning, connection. She'd found herself. Well, 25 years after the trial, Elena Vance passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 75 years old. The funeral was held at the Riverbend National Cathedral. Thousands attended. Nurses, advocates, patients whose lives she'd saved, people who'd never met her but had been changed by her work. Julian gave the eulogy. Elena used to say she was just a nurse who couldn't walk away, he began, his voice thick with emotion. But she was so much more than that. She was a force, a revolution, a reminder that one person, one choice, can change the world. He paused, looking out at the crowd. She saved my life. But she did more than that. She taught me what it means to matter, to fight, to refuse to be silent. His voice broke. The world is better because Elena Vance was in it, and it will never forget her. Barsit. Today, the Vance Initiative operates in all 50 states and 12 countries. Over 2 million patients have been protected. Countless lives have been saved. And every person who works there carries the same mission: refuse to be silent, see people, fight. Because Elena Vance showed them that one person can make a difference. That power doesn't come from status or wealth. It comes from showing up, from caring when it's hard, from refusing to let anyone disappear. Her legacy isn't in the buildings or the policies or the awards. It's in every nurse who speaks up, every advocate who fights back, every person who chooses to see someone the world has overlooked. Elena Vance was never invisible. She was a light, and that light will never go out. The end.